Alright, so in this video we're checking out the DJI O4 Air Unit and Air Unit Pro. I'm going to unbox these first and then do some of the physical measurements and weights and everything, and then we'll get into all the specs. Here's what the two boxes look like. Not much on here. Got some information here in the back. Same with the O4 Air Unit. So go ahead and get these opened up. Alright, so here's everything that came in the box for the O4 Air Unit Pro. And you get your manual. Look at that here in a second. This is the Air Unit itself with two antennas. And you got your camera unit here, the sensor unit, and you get your cable. And for the O4 Air Unit, the parts come in this little electrostatic bag, and then here is the manual. Alright, so here's what's inside. This is like the camera mount, and then you have some silicone grommets and some screws here. I think these are, not sure if these are M2 screws. They look like they have a self-tapping type of thread there, probably for this plastic piece, I imagine. And then this is the board. It comes with a single whip antenna. Got your connector here. It's quite a bit shorter than the one for the Pro. Of course, this is for smaller quads that are targeting quads that are less than 2 inches for props. And then you got the MIPI cable here, also pretty short. Very interesting sensor here. So you got your camera sensor and MIPI cable there, plastic here. I'm not sure what this blue thing is, if this is maybe like a lens protector. Yeah, it looks like this is a lens protector. And then for mounting purposes, I guess you can either leave it like this and mount it in your own DIY way, or you can use the included mount. I guess this would snap on here like so, and then you'd use these screws there to mount it. Take a closer look at the Air Unit Pro. So here are the antennas, and it looks like they use UFL connectors there, and it looks like these are some hex screws here for the Air Unit. I think this is the bottom. That's where the connector goes in, right over here. Yeah, and you have solder pads there. This is kind of like the Vista. Alright, so take a look at one of the sides here. So the bottom, here's the back with the antennas, and you got a bind button here, some ventilation. It looks like there's just one board inside. Micro SD card slot, and you have a heatsink here on top with some markings there. O4 Air Unit Pro. Got a USB-C port here on the, I guess, the right side, if this is facing forward, and this is the front side here with the MIPI cable, I think. Yeah, MIPI cable and the connector that goes to your flight controller are on the same side now, and the antennas come out the back, so that's interesting. We'll measure the cable length here in a second. And then here's the sensor unit. It's upside down. Looks like it should be oriented this way, and the MIPI cable comes out at the top. Interesting. M2 screws here for mounting. We're going to measure all this here in a second. 1/1.3 inch sensor that was leaked previously, but I think some of the leaks said that the sensor was going to be an f2.0. It's actually an f2.8. Interesting. So not as wide of an aperture as previously assumed. Maybe they changed it at the last minute. I don't know. Not sure, but let's go ahead and start measuring all this here. Got my caliper out. Let's go ahead and zero this. So this is going to be the width of the camera sensor. Side to side is 20 millimeters across. Interesting. I thought it would be bigger. So that should fit frames before. I think the O3 camera was 20 millimeters across, so it potentially could fit those. No problem with the screw holes are definitely a different width now. So here, let's just try and just line up the center hole here. Say it's roughly 15-ish millimeters between two screw holes there. And then the height, let's measure it at the widest point here. Looks like it's about 23.26. Yeah, and then in the back part here, I think it's a little bit narrower. So in the back here, it's like 19.9. And then let's go from the front of this lip there to the back of the camera. It's about 20, hold a second here, 26.61. All right, so measuring the length of the MIPI cable from the back of the camera sensor to the air unit, it's about 130 millimeters. All right, let's measure the air unit itself. So side to side, it's 33.66. Front to back, 33.42, and then the height, definitely shorter than the O3 air unit. It's coming in at 13, a little over 13. And then I believe this is going to be 20 by 20 here for the mounting holes. Yep, 20 millimeters. And this is probably going to be 25.5 millimeters. And a little over 25 millimeters for the outer mounting holes. And they look like standard M2 screws there. So you should be able to mount this on pretty much any existing frame as long as it's within that 33 millimeter outer boundary. And so it should fit most frames, and it's a lot shorter. So I'm thinking, even this, I thought this was the bottom. I'm thinking that this is probably the bottom, because most frames you're gonna have the screws coming through the bottom of the frame and then into the area here, or you could mount it to the top plate perhaps. Yeah, not sure. You can go either way here. And then let's go ahead and measure these antennas. So measuring from the back of the air unit, kind of stretch it out here. The tip of the antenna is about a little over 100 millimeters, like 104. All right, so let's go ahead and weigh everything here, and with the antennas and the included cable and the screws as well that are mounting there for the camera mounting. And wow, okay, I'm shocked. It's 34.6 grams. The O3 air unit with the cable and everything with the antennas was 40 grams, so it's actually lighter. That's pretty amazing. I think the manuals are the same. Let's see here. Yeah, so yeah, they depict both the air unit and the air unit Pro here. And it does show the wiring diagram here, and I believe this is the same as it was on the O3 air unit. And here are the specifications for the air unit and the air unit Pro in terms of power input. So yes, the air unit can go 3.7 to 13.2 volts, very nice. So 1 to about 3S high volt. And then the air unit Pro is 7.4 to 26.4. So I would say safely 3 to 6S. I think 2S, if you go below about 3.5 volts, if you get 3.5 volts, it's only 7 volts, so it may or may not work on 2S. We'll test that a little bit later in the video. All right, so take another closer look here at the air unit. Single board, no heat sink, and obviously it's got the same PH or SH connector there. 6 wire. It's a little bit shorter connector. USB-C. There's no SD card storage or micro SD card slot, but there's built-in storage on here. I believe it's like 22 or 24 gigabytes. I'll note up something on the screen here if I don't remember exactly off the top of hand. And then obviously if you plug it in, it'll show up as a USB drive. Let's go ahead and measure this. This is probably a standard whoop style, like 25 by 25 millimeters, but get the board measurements first here. All right, it's very thin, so 30 millimeters in this direction, and then in this direction, yeah, and it's 30 millimeters in this direction as well. So that means that these holes are probably 25 millimeters. Yeah, it's about 25.5 millimeters as expected, so standard whoop style mounting, and these look like your standard M2 screw holes, not this smaller like M1.6 you see on the O3 air unit. Let's see if I can try and find the thickest part of the board. Here's probably where this USB-C port is. So, and then there's a little like a capacitor or something right there on this side. So this is measuring about 6 millimeters in thickness, give or take. But the board itself, at its thinnest point, it is super thin. It's like, let's measure this. It's less than a millimeter thick, it's like 0.8 millimeters thick. Yeah. So this side here, you got your UFL connector for the whip antenna, and this antenna is not super long, so it's only about, looks like a little less than 80 millimeters long, but it looks super clean. I think this is your flash chip for this memory storage. Not sure what's underneath here, this little RF shield, probably some transmitting type stuff because that's closer to the antenna. And then on this side is a sticker here. And try and peel it up, but it's kind of stuck on this little rubber stuff here. I don't want to rip it off and maybe damage anything before I actually test it. But I imagine it's just some standard components. There's probably nothing super important under there. And I think this is another one of these little processing chips here. And then over here is the USB-C port and the plug MIPI cable. And interesting, the MIPI cable comes out of the side like that at an angle. But on the camera, it goes straight down. And nothing over here. You got the bind button over here. And another quick look at the camera. So I'll measure it here without the mount. It's about 10.8 across that way. And then this plastic part here. Yeah, about 10.8. Front to back's about 11.3. And then let's measure the full height of the PCB. It's 17.1, and the width of the PCB is about 13.5. And we'll go ahead and measure this camera mount here. 14 millimeters. All right, so that should fit a lot of microframes, but again, this the screw holes are really wide apart. So these are about 16 millimeters across. I think that's the same as the Air Unit Pro. Let me see here. Yeah, that's the same. I guess we're gonna have frames with this mounting soon. We'll have to figure out something in terms of getting it into a frame. But the camera, this mount height is about 19.9. All right, so this is the weight of the Air Unit with the antenna and the cable connector without the camera mounts. Wow, it's 9.3 grams, pretty light. So I'm going to add actually I'm going to add the grommets first. These, you're going to probably use these on the actual board, so I'm going to put those on there first. And these look like standard M2 screw hole here, so no unusual screws. So I put those on there, and then it takes up to 9.3. And then I'll put this mount here along with the 4 screws. You probably you'll need these to mount this. So you got 4 metal screws and a little camera mount, and it takes up to 10.8 grams. All right, so just a quick comparison of the O3 Air Unit to the O4 Air Unit side by side, and very similar in terms of width and height in this direction here, and then in terms of the height, it's definitely a lot shorter. Well, not a lot, but I'd say maybe a millimeter or two. You can look at the official dimensions, and they're definitely smaller, and I think that's why it's lighter. Here's a look at the 2 camera lenses. I don't have a Nevada 2, so I can't compare this to a Nevada 2, but I suspect it is pretty similar in size. But you can see that the lens overall, at least the outer lens, is significantly larger than the O3 lens. Of course, the specs are quite different as well. Yeah, for those of you that have a Nevada 2, let me know if you think that that's the same lens. That looks pretty flat, at least to me. And I wonder if the Avata 2 ND filters fit this. That'd be a good question as well. I don't know. I don't have an Avata 2. If anyone knows, let me know down in the comments. Alright, so if you remove the 4M2 screws here on, I guess, the bottom here, this is like a cover, and I'm not sure if this is metal or not, but look at the inside here. You can see that basically I took it apart because I'm going to need to take these antennas off to get them through a mounting part that I'm making. And then there's a little foam pad there to hold those antennas in place, and you can see there's a ribbon cable here, and I think that goes to this board right here with the plug and those little solder points right there. Yeah, that's what that looks like. It is screwed on over there. You can see there's a little heat shield or RF shield there. So you suppose it could pop that off. And yeah, this definitely looks like a single board in there, and just with 2 antennas instead of 1. It looks like there's that same RF can right there that's on the standard O4 Air Unit. If I bring this over here like this, I don't want to stress out that ribbon cable too much, but that looks really similar. Probably making a lot of wrong assumptions, but the ribbon cable for the camera comes out in the same spot, so I wonder if the cameras are compatible. Interesting. Well, maybe at some point in the future I'll swap some parts up, for probably not for this video. This video is probably going to be way too long. Alright, so I just want to go over the specs of the 2 air units in a little bit more detail here. I'm not going to go over every little number here in this segment, but you can pause the video if you want to look at these in more detail. But basically, here's the weight and the dimensions. I already showed you some of that stuff already. The sensor size here, 1/1.3 for the Pro. That is the same as on the Avata 2. And then the 1/2-inch CMOS sensor on the O4 is the same size sensor that's on the Neo. And then if you look at the other camera specs here, the lens. So, for example, here, for the hardware specs of the lens, it's 155-degree field of view, f2.8 aperture. This is also the same as the Avata 2, and then the 117.6-degree field of view and f2.8 aperture. All of these numbers here are identical to the Neo. While the hardware, the sensor, and the lenses might be the same as the Neo and the Avata 2 for these two, I think there's some other differences here. So, for example, you look at the video resolution, 4K 4:3, 60 FPS is available on the O4 Air Unit, but is not on the Neo. You cannot get that on the Neo. And then for the O4 Pro, I think these are also the same as what's on the Avata 2. And also this lens and sensor is, I believe, the same one that's on the Action 4, the DJI Action 4 camera. But this particular camera does not offer 24 and 25 frames per second. So you just get the 30 and the 40 and the 60 here in 4:3 mode. And you go to 16:9 mode, you get the 120 FPS. So I think these are identical to the Avata 2, but they're a little bit different from the Action 4. And then if you move on here, bitrate, again, I think this is the same as the Avata 2, 130 megabits. And this 100 megabits on the O4 I think is a lot higher, and that's because it does 4K 60. The 4K 30 I think is the same as the Neo. So the Neo, which can only go to 4K 30, I think that's like 50 or 60 megabits, and the O4 does go to 100 megabits. So you get a little bit more here than you do on the Neo. And then for color mode, D-Log-M, which is on the Avata 2, the Action 4, the Action 5, Action 3, things like the Mini 4 Pro and the Mavic Air 3, Air 3S. You have that here on the O4 Pro, but you don't have that on the O4. You just have the standard color profile. So in D-Log-M, you get the 10-bit recording, whereas in standard color, you get 8-bit recording. So for those of you that want to match your video footage with like your other DJI camera drones and cameras, the D-Log-M is the way to go, and it gives you the best footage. And just like on the O3 Air Unit, you do have to shoot in wide angle mode and have Rocksteady disabled to be able to stabilize in gyroflow. Of course, you can turn on Rocksteady for both of these, but for most of you guys, I think we'll probably want to go with gyroflow. Gyroflow is supported on the O4 as well. Of course, you just have the normal color profile. There's no ultra wide angle mode in the O4, whereas there's ultra wide on the O4 Pro. I think that has to do with the field of view of the lens on the O4, which is like 117 degrees, not that wide. But you do still get the 4:3 mode, and you can stabilize it in gyroflow with EIS off or rock steady off, and get that. You know, it's okay. It's not super wide, but it'll do in a pinch. So I want to move on here to the transmitter power, and you can see here in FCC regions on the O4 Pro, you do get the 33 dBm, which is up to 2 watts, but that's only in auto transmitting mode. If you switch to manual mode, I believe the maximum is 1.2 watts or 1200 milliwatts. And then on the O4, it does go up to 30 dBm, which is 1 watt, which is kind of amazing for that tiny board. Also, in terms of maximum range, I believe the 15 kilometers is the same as the Avata 2. I'm not sure what the max on the Neo was, but the O4 is 10 kilometers, which is, I believe, the same as the O3 system. All right, so now to the latency here, and now the both of these, the O4 Pro and the O4, they offer this new racing mode that was not in the O3 system. I believe it's exclusive to the O4 system, and the latency numbers are different based on which one you're using, the O4 Pro or the O4, and which goggles you're using. So with the goggles 3 on the O4 Pro, you get the best latency. It's 15 milliseconds, which is 1 millisecond more than HD0, and it is fixed latency. I did ask DJI about that. Apparently in this mode, in race mode, there's no retransmissions. So I did test on the bench with my 1000 frame per second camera, and it verified that on this goggle, in this mode, 15 milliseconds is verified. So that is kind of amazing. Now with the O4 standard Air Unit, on the goggles 3, the latency is 20 milliseconds. So I believe it has to do with the fact that it is the processing power on the O4. I believe it's underclocked compared to the O4 Pro. So that's why you don't have heat sinks on the O4, and that's why it's a little bit slower. And then if you go to the N3 goggles versus the goggles 3, it also slows down, and that is, in this case, is 22 milliseconds for the N3 goggles with the O4 Pro, and that is because while you're still able to get the 1080p 100 frames per second on the N3, the screens are 60 hertz display, so 60 FPS max. That's why you get the 22 milliseconds latency there. And then on the O4, it's again a little bit higher because it's a little bit slower clocked on the O4, and you get 27 milliseconds latency. Now, if you use the O4 Pro or the O4 with the goggles 2 or the goggles Integra, you get the standard. So basically on the O4 Pro, the 30 milliseconds latency, which is consistent with the O3 system. And then on the O4, again, because it's a little bit slower, it's 35 milliseconds. My understanding is when you're using the goggles 2 or the goggles Integra, because they were based on the O3 system, the O4 Air Units, they both go into like a O3 compatibility mode. And so you basically get the same characteristics in terms of range and penetration that you got with those goggles on the O3 Air Units, but you get the better video recording, obviously, because you have the better camera hardware on the O4 Air Units. So you get those characteristics for the onboard recording, but for the transmission characteristics with these older goggles that are based on O3, you basically get the same O3 characteristics, same range limitations and penetration that you're going to get with the O3 Air Unit, and because the O4 is going into an O3 compatibility mode. Last thing I want to note is on the voltage range on the O4, while it does say it will go down to 3.7 volts, I did test on a 1S system or 1S setup on just a 1S battery, and it did stay powered on in low power mode all the way down to 3 volts, and then once you go below 3 volts, it basically just loses connection, the board resets, and it loses power. I'm not sure I would recommend even trying this on a 1S system, because obviously on 1S batteries you get a lot more voltage sag, and as you get closer to the end of the battery, the voltage sag is more, and there's going to be a lot of times you're going to be dropping even sometimes close to 3.0 volts or below, and then when that happens you lose video. So I would not recommend putting this on a system that is going to be dropping that voltage that low. I believe there's some 1S boards that have a 5-volt regulator you can connect this to that will maintain that 5 volts. And then in that case, it's probably going to be okay because it obviously will be above that 3.7 volt threshold. I think that's why they made it 3.7 volts. It's kind of on the conservative side. It can go lower, but I think in a lot of 1S systems, when you connect the air unit to VBAT and the voltage goes, if it sags below 3 volts, it just powers off and you lose video. It loses connection. You're just going to crash. So would not recommend doing that. All right, so I do want to talk a little bit about getting these air units into builds. It's a pretty important aspect of these products. So for the O4 Pro, I have this installed in a Darwin FPV. It's called the FoldApe4. So it's a 4-inch folding long-range drone. If you're curious about where that link is to the video, let me know in the comments. But I basically took the O3 air unit out that was in here and put in the O4 air unit Pro. And I had to create, obviously, a custom camera mount here. So this is a TPU part with that special 20 millimeter or 16 millimeters distance between 2 screw holes to get this to fit into the frame. And then the air unit is actually mounted a lot easier. The O3 air unit was mounted with some M1.6 screws, and the holes in the carbon plate on this particular model were M1.6. So I had to kind of drill them out a little bit to use some M2 screws because the 25 millimeter mounting holes on the O4 Pro are M2. So I was able to get M2 screws in there. And then I took so this is actually the bottom cover of the O4, and it's actually installed upside down. And I took those countersunk screws out that hold the cover on, and then I have this M2 screw that goes all the way through. And if you take that screw out, there's a hole on each of the corners that goes all the way through, so that you can find threading for a screw somewhere in there. And I think my screw is about that long right there. And yeah, so basically took the included screw out and put my own screw into the carbon plate. I have a little rubber grommet here for a spacer, and then the battery strap goes underneath there as well, hold everything in place. And then that screw goes into this metal heatsink to secure that. And as you can see, it is upside down right now in here with the heatsink on the bottom. I haven't had any issues with heat. It's been very good, solid. And I'm of course using the SD card here for recording, and you can see here the behind is upside down. So yeah, it's installed upside down. So the nice thing about the O4 Pro now with compared to the O3 is that the connector that goes to the flight controller is on the same side as the MIPI cable. So for those installations where the air unit is going to go into the back of the frame, typically you would have that cable that would run underneath the air unit and then through the back. You don't have to do that anymore. It'll just come in straight from the flight controller into basically now the front of the air unit, and that's where the MIPI cable comes out. So that's kind of nice. And then the only thing that comes out of the back now are the antennas. And yes, I made some custom holders for the antenna as well. So I will, I'll put a link to this down in the description to I'll upload to my Cults 3D account. At some point, message me or send me a comment if you are wondering about how to get that for this particular model. It might fit for others, I don't know. You'll have to figure that out for yourself. But yeah, figuring out how to get the camera to mount was the most challenging thing. The air unit is pretty easy. And yeah, I think for any existing frame, this camera will not fit anything that fits for an O3, unless you do some severe modifications to the front end where the camera mounts. And I think you're going to find a whole bunch of new camera mounts for all the new models here. So here's the new models coming from iFlight that I'll just show you an example of what their camera mount looks like. It's basically totally brand new. Now, it's possible that manufacturers of existing models like this one here from Darwin FPV, they may come out with updated 3D prints for their camera mounts, if that's possible. A lot of them are like kind of made out of metal now, like of aluminum, CNC aluminum, and that may not be possible without a complete rework. But it would be nice if they provided updated parts for an O4 camera, because it is 20 millimeters wide, so it should fit in terms of width. It's just that the mounting holes have to be re-engineered in whatever they're doing. So just things to keep in mind if you're considering going to the O4 and what kind of builds am I going to. Now for the that's the O4 Pro. So the regular O4, I have this here, and this is the GEP-RC T-Cube 18. This was the analog version. In the last video, I think I made this on my second channel, converted it to 2S, and I put a BT 3.0 connector in there. But yeah, this was a very, very easy swap in because it is 25.5 millimeters mounting for the flight controller, and there was like a plastic part in here that was holding the analog video transmitter. I removed that. I'm using the exact same screws and nuts, and I just swapped in swapped out that board, swapped in this new board using the exact same hardware. So I didn't have to do hardly anything. I elected not to use the rubber grommets that the O4 Air Unit came with. I just used a screw and nut that the T-Cube 18 came with, and it just basically went straight in. And having any issues there, I just kind of had to figure out where to wire my connector to the flight controller. I did not use the included one, just use like a spare connector I had somewhere lying around. And I don't have the S-Bus connected here because I have the Express LRS built into the flight controller on this particular build. But mounting the Air Unit is going to be really easy. Again, just a quick swap out of whatever board you have in your current model for the existing one, as long as it's 25.5 millimeters. And that literally was the easiest part. Now the camera is a totally different story. I had to create a custom TPU port here. I did not use the included mount that DJI includes. I wanted to get this in here as easily as possible. And it is 14 millimeters across, kind of. And I had to make a mount to sort of fit this in here and get that screw into the back part of this mount. And because I think previously here was a Caddx camera, was 14 millimeters, an analog camera. So I had to create a custom part to be able to mount this. And, later on I'll talk about the footage. Footage is fine, no major issues, as long as you have a pretty good PID tune. Flies really smooth and nice, and pretty nice little footage here from something that weighs like 50 grams. It's kind of amazing. So back to the O4 Pro camera. I was wondering earlier in the video if the Avata 2 filters would fit. They do fit, and I did reach out to Freewell, and they sent me their Avata 2 filters. I don't have an Avata 2, so I can't compare how this fits on the Avata 2 to this. However, when I do put these on here, there is a little bit of a gap in the back of the camera here because it is not exactly the same shape as an Avata 2. So I didn't notice any issues with the footage, but I can imagine if the sun comes in at the right angle from the back, you're going to get a glare reflecting from the back edge of the ND filter. I didn't see that in any of the footage that I saw, but there might be some ways to get around that by putting some foam or something on the sides. But in terms of the way the filters lock into place, they lock into the top and the bottom just like they do on the Avata 2. And the footage seems pretty good as far as I can tell. Okay, so I'm going to show you some footage here from the O4 Pro and the O4. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail right now because this video is already really, really long. I basically shot everything for the O4 Pro in the D-Log-M and applied the Avata 2 LUT that DJI provides. I'm going to make a whole video on how to get the best settings for the O4 Pro because I believe, in my opinion, this is actually better footage than most GoPros that you're going to see right now. So I'll have a whole video on that, and we'll discuss that in a separate video. But yeah, I mean, obviously you're looking at 130 megabit, basically a flat color profile footage that's been color graded, and it looks really phenomenal. It's the best you're going to see, better than O3. It's really good in low light, although I think, again, I'm going to have another separate video on the low light stuff because the way I have to think about this is this camera technology has been out for a while, so people already have really good settings for their Avata 2 and their Action 4. So if you go search for videos on that, you'll probably get like a pretty good starting point. I'm going to try and expand a little bit in a separate video, but yeah, you can see all this footage here in bright sunlight, in low light, even at night. The footage is way better than what you get from O3, and even way better than anything you get from a GoPro, especially at night, because the GoPro sensors are so much smaller. You just don't get that good low light footage. So hats off to DJI. They did a really, really good job. I was kind of waiting for the Avata 2 to come, to the, basically as an O4 Air unit, and it took them 8 months or 9 months, I guess now, to finally do it. And I'm really, the wait's been long, but I'm kind of glad it's finally here. Now for the O4 Air unit footage, it, because there's no D-Log-M, it is kind of oriented towards budget users. I kind of wish that they would have more features like the O4 Pro in the O4, but I guess obviously because they're going for a lower price point, kind of targeting people that are sort of in that same market as the Neo, you get footage that isn't spectacularly great. I would say it is not quite as good as the O3. The O3 is probably a little bit better, especially if you're recording in Decine-alike and 10-bit mode, because you're only getting 8-bit mode here, 8-bit video, and it's got a lot of saturation and especially a lot of contrast baked in. You can kind of mitigate that in post and sort of adjust that. So you're seeing some footage here where I've kind of, did some color grading and some manipulation in post to sort of improve it. And I'm going to have another video, another completely separate video on the O4 Air unit and how to get the best video for that. I'm not really sure when that's going to come out because I'm kind of waiting for ND filters to come out for this camera, which there are none available at the time of the recording of this video. And the only way you can get the best footage from this camera is to go into manual mode, lock the shutter, lock the white balance, and use ND filters. So going to wait for that video. That's going to come out probably at some point later, whenever the ND filters come out, if they ever do, and that'll be at some point in the future. So stay tuned for that. All right, so some good news here for those of you that fly the 4K 30 mode on the O3, now in the O4 Pro and the O4. When you're flying 4K 30, the latency is much improved. It's a lot more flyable. Now, I don't really fly 4K 30 too much on the O3. It's not, for me at least, it's not terrible. I'm able to fly without too many issues, but I can definitely notice there's a little bit more jitter, and you don't feel this at all in the O4 Pro or the O4. So apparently they fixed it, I guess, or improved it. So the latency is a lot better now in the 4K 30 mode. So those of you that fly the 4K 30, especially for like low light flying, night flying, that kind of thing, where you have to fly 4K 30 and the slower shutter speeds, you'll find that the latency to the goggles is a lot better now. Alright, so I just want to go over the menus that you see when you're in race mode. So you're going to go to the transmission menu and going to go down to this versus racing mode. You're going to select that to turn it on. It'll be green, and if it's off, then you're in just regular auto mode. So we'll turn that on, and you get this warning: hit enable. For the test I was doing, I was setting the transmission power to 200 milliwatts. You can set it to auto, 25, 50, 100, 200, 400, 700, and 1200. And those are the levels. And if you want to set it manually, there's an option also to do transmission power fine tuning in this menu here. And it has levels from 0 to -6, and I think the highest is +6. So yeah, so each level is supposed to be half dB increments of up or down. So basically, -6 would be a -3 dB decrease, and +6 would be a +3 dB increase. And so if you want to increase it, say, by 3 dB, select 6 here. And then, so basically 6 is double, or 3 dB is double, and -3 dB is half. So this would be actually 400 milliwatts if you want to technically measure what the dB is. So you can actually set the power levels that way, sort of fine tune it based on your needs. Most people probably just leave it at 0. Obviously the different levels are all going to be adequate for most people. And then there's channel mode. In racing mode, it's going to be manual. Of course, in non-racing mode, you can also do this manually. But in race mode, it is default. And the bandwidth is selectable between 20 and 40 megahertz, and that gives you the different channels. I think 40 is going to give you 4 or 3 channels. We'll go back and look at that in a second, but 20 megahertz gives you 8 channels, and they're actually in the race band. So R1, R2, R3, etc. actually corresponds to the race band frequencies for analog FPV, and I believe HD0 follows the same thing. So I believe in O4 they've now switched to this methodology. I don't know if it'll work with other systems. I was told that they did test this with 8 DJI pilots, 8 O4 Air units, and they said that it did work in terms of a racing setup, but they did not test it with, say, 4 DJI pilots, O4 pilots with like 4 analog pilots, or, mixing HD0 with analog and O4. That's probably going to be a test for the future. I obviously can't do that because I don't have 8 O4 Air units to test. So if someone in the future, well, if you're watching this in the future, if someone has the O4 Air unit and you want to do a test with me, I'm in the Orange County area in Southern California, and let me know. We can get together and maybe get together some analog and HD0 pilots and see what kind of tests we can do and see if there's interference. But I did find that there was some interference on just sort of a basic test. I did like one, I did an analog 25 milliwatts on raceband 1 and O4 Pro on 25 milliwatts on raceband 2, and I did notice a little bit of interference. It wasn't like debilitating, but there's definitely a little bit of interference there if you are right next to each other, but it's not like terrible. But of course, that's going to require more testing for later. Let's see what happens if we go to the 40 megahertz setup. I believe that gives you fewer channels. So what do we have here? Nope, looks like we still have 8 channels. So not sure how that works. We'll have to come back to that. Again, I think that's going to require testing with multiple pilots, and that's something I can't do right at this time, unfortunately. Alright, so in this segment I do want to talk a little bit more about the racing mode and the low latency mode that now is offered with the Goggles 3 and the N3, and obviously with the O4 Air units. So, with obviously the best case scenario is going to be the Goggles 3 with the O4 Pro and 15 milliseconds, and the best comparison would be to the high-end HD0 goggles with like a 90 hertz camera, which I don't have either of those. I did have the HD0 goggles for a brief time, like about a week, but they didn't cross over with this review, so I couldn't test these back to back. So instead, what I'm going to show you is the race mode on the Goggles N3, and basically we're looking at 60 hertz cameras here. So this is the Lux camera from the Mobula 7 HD0 and Freestyle, and then the Emax HD0 goggles. So this is kind of like a budget to budget comparison, and I'm probably going to make another video just on these two, what you get for the money. But yeah, basically what we're looking at here is the O4 system, O4 Air unit, and in the race mode, I'm using raceband 1, and I have both of these transmitting at 200 milliwatts. So they're both using the same channel, and in this area, basically do a really simple test here. I just want to get an idea of what the penetration is like in race mode at that fixed latency going behind an object like a building. So I'm going through this whole building here, and so you're seeing these two sort of back-to-back flights as to what the breakup looks like and what the video looks like. And obviously what you're seeing, what DJI is doing is, showing that breakup, that sort of analog fake breakup that you see in HD0. It just reduces the bitrate down to like, 6 megabits, I think, and you get a very kind of grainy image, whereas you get more like this sort of static image on the HD0 when you're kind of penetrating to that building. The interesting thing is when I did the same test with the O4 Pro and the Goggles 3, going behind the same building, the bitrate I don't think dropped very much at all, maybe just like 17 megabits, and the image was much, much better. Obviously that's the advantage of having the O4 Pro over the O4, but I wanted to just sort of give you an idea of how the O4 in race mode compares to an HD0 system. So it's a budget HD0 versus budget O4 system. And that kind of gives you an idea of what that footage looks like. All right, so just a brief overview of the thermal limits of the O4 Air Unit Pro. It's definitely improved over the O3 Air Unit. You're seeing some thermal video here of the temperatures. I think I left these on for about a minute or 2 minutes, and then you're seeing what the temperatures are after it's warmed up. The O3 Air Unit will eventually overheat if you just let it sit there. The O4 Pro did not overheat. I left it sitting on the bench without any air cooling for I think about 5 minutes. It was just fine. I didn't get an overheat warning like I did in the O3 Air Unit. And then on the O4 Standard Air Unit, because there's no heat sinks, after about 2 minutes, it'll start getting pretty hot, about 130, 135 Fahrenheit, and it will eventually overheat. So definitely improved on the O4 Pro because of probably the better components and of course the big heatsink, but the standard O4 has no heatsink, so you definitely want to have some air cooling for that one. Alright, so I'm going to end the video here. Here's some my conclusions and some hot takes. You guys can sort of comment below as to what you think about these. I haven't spent that much time with the system. I'm going to be doing some more testing. You probably may see some more future videos. So if there's something specific you want me to look at for a future video, let me know in the comments below. I didn't really know what people would be mostly interested in, so I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time in doing tests that no one's going to care about. So let me know what you care about down in the comments below, and I'll be sure to make note of that for future videos and future content. Now for me, in the about 1 month that I've tested the O4 system, in terms of range and penetration, in all the places that I fly, it performed just as well as the O3, if not better. I haven't really noticed any hiccups or, like loss of video or anything really bad happening. Nothing bad has happened. So all the confidence that I've had in O3, I still have all that confidence with O4. So definitely, I think that, in terms of like what more it can do in terms of range, obviously, you see that 10 kilometers versus 15 kilometers, obviously O4 can do more. I obviously can't test that because there's just obviously, you're just not allowed to in the United States to do those kind of range tests. But in terms of everywhere I fly where I might have issues with penetration going behind buildings, haven't any problems whatsoever. Now, in terms of the 4K footage from the O4 Pro, definitely a big thumbs up. It's way better than what came out on O3. Now, I don't want to over-exaggerate. Obviously, O3 is pretty good as well, but now that I've seen the footage from O4 and what it actually looks like, I have seen some of this footage from the Avata 2 on YouTube, but not actually in person, like the actual raw files. And when you pixel peep those raw files, you're like, wow, this is really, really good. And especially in like low light situations, the O4 Pro does phenomenally better than the O3. So, my hot take here for the O4 Pro is that you really don't need a GoPro anymore, for sure. And so all of you guys that are like, putting together systems going into 2025 and into the future, you really don't need a GoPro mount anymore or any sort of other, action camera. So like, I think that the O4 Pro is pretty much killed off like the naked GoPros, any kind of GoPro that you need for a larger quad. All like the smaller cameras, like the RunCam series, all those are pretty much kind of useless if you're going to if you put an O4 Pro into a quad and you throw a RunCam Thumb 2 on there, that footage is going to look so much worse. It's like, why bother? So I think that if, for that market, for those people that are going to be going to the O4 Pro, those cameras are completely useless. That you don't need anymore. Now, of course, there's going to be people down in the comments saying that, oh, GoPro is dead now, whatever. The FPV market is really tiny, so I highly doubt that GoPro is going to be dying anytime soon, although DJI is definitely, going after them in terms of like making GoPros kind of useless for FPV pilots. And I think that's what their goal is for the O4 Pro, and I think they've succeeded in that aspect. But in terms of GoPro disappearing in 2025, highly unlikely because the FPV market is pretty tiny compared to the rest of the action camera market. Now, with regards to the 15 milliseconds latency, will that kill off HG0? Probably not. I'm sure people will say that down in the comments that HG0 is dead now. There's probably overreaction. For me personally, I just fly O3. I'm happy with it. And there's a lot of people in that same boat as me. They don't really care about the low latency. They never cared, and because they just don't fly, they're not racers. They don't really care about that. So I don't think DJI is going to be growing their market share in that aspect. There's people they're like me. They already have them already, so they're not going to be gaining anything from that. I think though it's going to perhaps potentially hurt the growth of the HG0 market going forward. Now, it might be in going into the future, there might be more people interested in racing with the O4 Pro and the Goggles 3 with this low latency mode, because I think it now makes it kind of possible to do so. We'll have to see. I don't really know. Obviously, DJI listened to people based on the feedback from the O3 in terms of not having a low latency mode. They're providing that now. I don't really know. I can't judge it. I can't judge whether or not that's going to be effective for racers, because I'm not a racer myself. I think you're only going to know once you see 8 actual racing pilots to put this to a test on a racing track and see what performance occurs in that scenario. And there's no way for me to test that. So there's no way for me to know whether or not this actual mode, granted, yes, it is 15 milliseconds, is going to make a dent at all. It may or may not. I can't predict the future, but the fact that that option's there is something. It's definitely not nothing. So going forward, we'll have to see in 2025 how this affects the overall racing market for digital FPV. Anyway, I think it's going to cover for this video. I'll make future videos again. I'll listen to your comments down below. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video.